Nora Voss did not read the last line before she signed, not because she was careless, because the last line never mattered. Not for a woman alone, not in her experience. She pressed the pen down, wrote her name in the careful hand of someone who had spent a decade keeping other people's books, and folded the paper before the ink was fully dry. Then she picked up her trunk. No one offered, walked to the wagon, and told herself this was not hope. This was arithmetic, a roof, a wage, a reason to stop sleeping behind someone else's kitchen. She did not expect to find a trap inside. Before we go any further, if this story is already reaching you, whether you're watching from a quiet evening in Tennessee, a kitchen in Ohio, or somewhere, the nights come in long and slow. That means everything to me. Please subscribe to the channel, hit that notification bell so you never miss a story, and drop your city down in the comments. I read every single one. I want to see how far this story travels. Now stay with me, because what Nora finds inside that ranch will change everything she thought she had agreed to. The last 11 miles to Larimer Ranch, Nora Voss rode in silence next to a wagon driver who did not ask her name, did not look at her trunk, and did not offer a single word of conversation, which was the finest thing anyone had done for her in months. She used those 11 miles to go over the numbers in her head. Not because she was nervous, because numbers were the one thing that had never lied to her. Everything else people promises, the particular look on a man's face when he said, "Trust me," those things had a way of shifting. Numbers stayed where you put them. She had $17.40 in the inner pocket of her coat, one trunk, one satchel with a repaired strap, and a torn advertisement from the Harlan Creek Gazette folded into quarters in her left hand, soft at the creases from handling. Seeking capable woman for household and account management. Larimer Ranch, 7 miles past Creekwood Road. Practical arrangement. No sentiment required. She had read that last line in a cold boarding house room at 2 in the morning and felt something in her chest go absolutely still. Not because it was kind. Because it was honest in a way most offers weren't. Because whoever had written it understood that some people had exhausted their supply of sentiment and needed something sturdier to stand on. She'd written back the same day. Stated her qualifications plainly. Did not mention her husband's death. Did not mention the creditors. Did not mention the 2 years of quiet humiliation that followed a life spent keeping someone else's books without ever having her name attached to the work. She stated what she could do, listed the categories she had managed: accounts, receivable, payable, agricultural valuation, seasonal ledger, reconciliation, and said she was available immediately. The reply had come in 4 days. Come Thursday. See Larimer. 3 words. She had respected that enormously. The wagon stopped. The driver said, "That's the place," without inflection, and made no move toward her trunk. She got down herself, pulled the trunk to the ground, and looked at the ranch. It was not a ruin, which had been her private fear. It was not warm, which she had briefly and foolishly allowed herself to imagine. It was simply a working building, weathered boards, solid frame, a porch that needed one new plank on the left side. The windows were clean. The barn behind it was larger than the house. She read that detail the way she read a ledger. The land came first here. Everything else was secondary. She filed that away. She dragged the trunk to the porch, set it down, and knocked. The door opened. Cole Larimer was not what she had constructed from those 3 words, which had implied to her at least something blunt and worn down. He was tall, lean through the jaw and shoulder, with hands that belonged to someone who had been working this land since before he was old enough to consider doing otherwise. His eyes were a specific shade of gray that she would later decide was the color of careful, not cold, not warm, simply attentive in a way that had learned to cost nothing. He looked at her. She looked at him. "You're the woman from the letter," he said. "Nora Voss," she said. "Yes." He stepped back from the doorway, not with welcome, not with reluctance, simply making room. She brought the trunk in herself. He watched her do it and did not reach for it, and she noted that with approval. A man who immediately took your trunk was a man who had already decided what you needed. She preferred to be assessed accurately. The inside of the house told her things before he said a word. Every object in its place, not from care, but from the particular discipline of someone who had been the only person in a space for a long time, and had stopped allowing disorder, because disorder led to thinking, and thinking led somewhere he had apparently decided not to go. One coffee cup on the counter washed and inverted. Ledger books on the shelf stacked with precision that was almost aggressive. The kitchen table clean. The chair nearest the window slightly more worn than the others. He sat in that chair when he was alone. She knew it immediately. She knew the posture of solitude. "Sit down," he said. "I'll tell you what the work is." "I read the advertisement," she said. "I have questions first." Something shifted in his expression, not offense, not amusement. Recalibration. He had expected to run this conversation and was adjusting to the fact that he was not going to. "All right," he said. She set her satchel on the table, took out her notebook and pencil, and sat down. "You said account management. What is the current condition of the accounts?" "They're in order." "Are they?" Not a question. His jaw moved slightly. "Mostly?" "I need to see the ledger books before we discuss terms," she said. "I won't agree to manage accounts I haven't reviewed. I made that particular mistake once. I won't make it again." He was quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet that was deciding something. Then he crossed to the shelf, took down the top ledger, and set it on the table without argument. She opened it. She read for 4 minutes without speaking. He stood near the counter with his arms crossed and did not attempt to fill the silence. That she thought was a man who understood that some information required time to absorb. Another thing she filed away. The entries were neat, clearly written, and approximately 6 months behind in 3 critical categories. The livestock valuation column hadn't been updated since early spring. There were margin notations, 3 of them, same hand referencing what appeared to be a secondary debt instrument she hadn't seen the paperwork for yet. The water rights assessment was listed at a figure that had likely been outdated since the drought 2 seasons back. She didn't say any of this yet. She closed the ledger. "This is workable," she said. "What are the household duties?" He told her. "Kitchen. Preserving when the season required it. 2 ranch hands took meals there, breakfast and supper. Mending when it came up. Nothing beyond what needed doing." She asked about the wage. He told her. Fair, not generous. She knew the difference and respected the honesty of it. "The room," she said. "End of the hall. East-facing window. Gets morning light." "I need one thing understood before we agree on anything," she said. "I'm here in a professional capacity. I'll manage your household and your accounts with complete competence. I will not be managed in return. I will not be directed in how I do the work. And I will not be treated as anything other than what I am, which is the person keeping this operation from collapsing." She said that last part without apology. It was simply true, and she had learned that true things lost nothing by being stated plainly. Cole looked at her for a moment with those careful gray eyes. Then he said, "I wrote in that advertisement that no sentiment was required. I meant that in both directions. I ain't looking for anything from you that ain't part of the work, and I expect the same." "Then we understand each other," she said. "Reckon we do." She put out her hand. He shook it briefly, firmly, with no particular ceremony, and that was the arrangement. She didn't know, sitting at that table with his hand briefly in hers, that she had just made the most consequential agreement of her adult life. She thought she had negotiated herself a temporary shelter. She thought she had set up a situation with clear limits and manageable risks. She thought, most importantly, that she had arranged things so that nothing unexpected could reach her here. She was wrong on every count, but that would take time to discover. The first morning she was up before the light, not from nerves. She simply didn't sleep past 4, hadn't since the creditors came the first time, and she had stopped fighting that particular fact about herself. She had the coffee on and the breakfast half assembled before she heard movement in the rest of the house. Cole appeared in the doorway. He stopped, looked at the stove, looked at her, looked at the table already set for 2. He said nothing, poured himself coffee from the pot she had just made, sat down at the chair nearest the window. She put the plate in front of him and went back to work. Somewhere in the space between the coffee and the plate, a small, unnamed thing had been settled between them. Not friendship, not comfort. Something more functional, and in its way, more durable, the quiet agreement of two people who were going to occupy the same space efficiently and without unnecessary noise. His ranch hands arrived at sunrise. Brothers Amos and Dale Pruitt, 22 and 19, built like fence posts, and possessed of the focused social shyness of young men who spent most of their hours with livestock. They came through the back door, stopped when they saw her, and both removed their hats. "Morning, ma'am," Amos said. "Sit down," she said. "It's ready." They sat. They ate with the concentrated gratitude of people who had not recently experienced a decent meal, and they addressed her as ma'am with every single sentence, which she found both excessive and quietly touching. On the third day, Dale, the younger one, waited until his brother went out to hitch the horses, and then said without preamble, "You running from something, ma'am?" She looked up from the notation she was making. "I'm running toward something," she said. "Those are different things." He thought about that with the earnest focus of a 19-year-old deciding whether it made sense. Then he nodded. "Yes, ma'am," he said, and went outside. She returned to the numbers and tried not to think about whether she'd told him the truth. By the end of the first week, she had the household running with the kind of efficiency that came from knowing exactly where each minute was wasted and eliminating it. The dry goods shelf reorganized. The meal timing adjusted to align with the ranch hand's morning schedule. The kitchen inventory logged for the first time, apparently in at least 2 years. Cole noticed all of it. She knew because nothing in the house changed without him registering it the same way he registered everything quietly with those gray eyes that cataloged without commenting. On the 6th evening, the ranch hands were in town. She and Cole ate supper across the table from each other and went 20 minutes without a word, and partway through, she noticed she was not manufacturing calm. She was simply calm. That was different enough from her recent experience that she registered it the way you register a sound you don't recognize carefully without yet deciding what it means. He refilled her coffee without being asked. "Thank you," she said. He said. That was all. But she noted it. She noted everything. The ledger situation was considerably worse than she had indicated on day one. She had known it within the first hour of reading. But she had learned through her marriage, through the years of watching her husband present other people's assessments as his own, that the full scope of a financial problem delivered too early was a problem that did not get heard. People needed to trust the messenger before they could tolerate the message. So she had said workable, which was technically accurate, and spent the first week establishing herself as someone whose competence was not in question, before she began to show him what was actually in the books. What was in the books was a trap. She found the shape of it in stages. The primary note, a standard land loan from Harlan Creek's main bank, was unremarkable. But the secondary note referenced in the margin 3 times never formally entered into the accounts, as though whoever had first seen it had hoped it would resolve before it needed to be recorded, sent a specific kind of recognition down her spine. She searched the house, methodically, without announcing what she was doing. The document was in the bottom drawer of the desk, in the corner of the main room, underneath a 2-year-old seed catalog. She sat down, read it from the first line to the last, read it again, set it on the table, and pressed her palms flat against the wood, and breathed carefully, counting for 30 seconds. She had seen language like this once before, in a different state, in a different office, in a transaction that had ended with a man going to prison for land fraud. She had been 26 years old working as a file clerk, and she had flagged the clause to her supervisor, who had told her she was misreading it. She had not been misreading it. She had simply been too young and too unknown for anyone to act on what she said. She was not 26 anymore. The clause was on page 3 of the secondary note. It was written to look routine, the kind of boilerplate that made eyes slide past. What it established in the specific legal language of a man who knew exactly what he was doing was this: if the total outstanding debt of the ranch exceeded a defined percentage of the assessed land value. The note holder, a man named Martin Seal, Harlan Creek County, held the right to petition for immediate settlement, which meant in practice that Seal could initiate a legal seizure process within 90 days of filing. The assessed land value in the clause was from 4 years ago, before the drought, before the county-wide water rights adjustment that had revised the productive acreage rating downward across this entire region. The current assessed value, which she had already calculated from county records and the most recent agricultural reports from the Harlan Creek Land Office, was lower. Not catastrophically, but lower by exactly the margin needed if someone had been deliberately manipulating the outstanding debt in small invisible ways. Timing payments, adjusting interest calculations by fractions, adding administrative fees that individually appeared standard to push the ratio past the threshold. She had been sitting there for 20 minutes, working through the numbers a fourth time, when she heard Cole's boots on the porch. He came in, went to the basin, washed his hands the way he always did coming in from outside, without looking at the room first, as though he needed a moment to transition from open land to enclosed space. "Mr. Larimer," she said. He turned, looked at her, and then looked at the document on the table and at the notebook beside it filled with 4 pages of her calculations and at her face, which she was keeping very deliberately neutral. "What is it?" he said, not a question. "Sit down," she said, "and I need you to let me finish before you say anything. Can you do that?" He crossed the room and sat down. He did not reach for the document. He looked at her and waited. She told him, plainly, in the same voice she used for ledger figures. She walked him through the clause language, the threshold calculation, the current assessed value versus the clause's stated value, the debt trajectory, the timeline. She showed him every number. She showed him the specific points at which the debt had been adjusted in ways that were too small to notice individually and too consistent to be accidental. He was silent through all of it. A contained, compressed silence, not the easy quiet of their evenings, but something tighter, a man receiving information that required him to hold very still. When she finished, he said, "Martin Seal." "You know him?" "I know of him." His voice had gone flat. "Came to me 4 years back, just after my wife passed. Said he'd heard I was having a hard season. Said the terms were standard. Said it was just a bridge note." A pause. "I didn't read page 3. She said nothing. There was nothing useful to say about that. He had been a man in grief who had been approached at the exact right moment by someone who had been watching for it. "Can it be stopped?" Cole said. "Yes, but we need to move before he does." She pulled the notebook closer. "We file the corrected current land assessment with the county land office officially on record before Seal files his petition. If the accurate value is on record first, the clause threshold doesn't trigger. The debt ratio stays below the line. But timing is everything. He may be waiting for the next quarterly debt statement, which will show the number formally." She checked her notation. "That statement is issued in 22 days, so we have less than 22 days. We work as though we have 10, she said, in case he moves sooner than I've estimated." He was quiet. His hands were on the table flat, not clenched. She noticed that the steadiness of them. "You found all of this," he said, "in 2 weeks. This is what I do," she said. "You didn't have to bring it to me," he said. "You could have found it, decided it wasn't your problem, and left." He said it without accusation, as a plain fact. "Someone built a trap in your house," she said, "and assumed no one would be paying close enough attention to find it." She aligned the document with the edge of the table, straight precise. "I find that kind of assumption offensive." He looked at her for a long moment. And then, for the first time since she had arrived at Larimer Ranch, Cole. Larimer almost smiled. It arrived at one corner of his mouth and was gone almost before it formed like the first weather on a clear sky. But she saw it. "All right, Miss Voss," he said. "Tell me where we start." She opened her notebook to a clean page. Outside, the land was going dark, the way it always did out here. Gradually. Then all at once, the sky pulling color down toward the horizon, until what remained was just the deep quiet of open country under a vast and indifferent dark. But inside that kitchen, something had changed. Not with ceremony, not with any declaration. Just the particular unannounced shift of two people who had each been surviving alone, deciding without saying so, without needing to, that this one specific thing they were not going to face alone. Neither of them named it. The work was already beginning, and underneath the work, quiet as groundwater, something else had already begun to move, too slow to see, too steady to stop, the way the most consequential things always begin. The next morning, Nora was at the table before sunrise, with the secondary note laid flat, her notebook open beside it, and a second cup of coffee going cold at her elbow, because she kept forgetting to drink it. She had slept 4 hours. She didn't need more than that when her mind had something real to chew on, and right now her mind had plenty. She had gone through the debt trajectory 3 separate times the night before, each time hoping she had made an error in the calculation, and each time arriving at the same number. 22 days was generous. If Martin's seal was as deliberate as the claw's construction suggested, he had already identified the window and was watching it the way a man watches a door he knows is about to open. She was building a counter timeline in the notebook, what needed to be filed in what order, at which office, by which date when Cole came in. He stopped when he saw the table. The documents arranged in 3 columns. The 4 pages of calculations. The notation system she had developed overnight that used a shorthand he wouldn't recognize yet. "How long have you been up?" he said. "A while," she said. "Sit down. I need to walk you through the filing sequence before the ranch hands get here." He poured his coffee, sat down across from her, and did not ask any of the questions that most men would have asked. He did not say you didn't have to do this overnight, or you should have slept, or any of the other things that were true, but not useful. He looked at the table and said, "Walk me through it." That was the moment Nora Voss decided quietly, and without announcement, that Cole Larimer was not going to be a problem. He might be a great many other things, she didn't know him well enough yet to determine what. But he was not going to argue with her about the work, and that was the only thing that mattered right now. She walked him through it. The filing sequence had 4 steps. First, a formal request for current land assessment from the county assessor's office in Harlan Creek. This would establish the accurate land value on official record and supersede the outdated figure in Seal's clause. Second, a corrected accounting of all debt instruments associated with the property submitted to the land office with documentation of the manipulated payment history. Third, a formal notation of dispute on the secondary note itself, which would legally complicate Seal's ability to file a clean petition. Fourth, and this was the one that required Cole's direct participation, a sworn affidavit from Cole as property owner, attesting to the terms under which the secondary note had been presented to him. "That last one matters," she said. "If this goes before a judge, the affidavit establishes that the note was represented to you as a standard bridge instrument. It doesn't eliminate the clause, but it raises the question of whether the clause was disclosed properly. A judge who is paying attention will care about that." Cole was quiet for a moment. "You think it'll go before a judge?" "I think we do this correctly so it doesn't have to," she said. "But we prepare as though it will." He nodded. "What do you need from me today?" "Access to every piece of paper associated with this ranch that isn't already in the ledger books," she said. "Everything Seal sent you, everything the bank sent you, every correspondence related to the property in the last 5 years. And I need you to be honest with me about anything you signed that you didn't read fully." He looked at her. There was something in that look that she couldn't classify yet. Not embarrassment, not defensiveness. Something quieter. "There may be more than one thing," he said. "I expect so," she said. "That's all right. I'm not here to assign blame. I'm here to find every piece of this and understand it before Seal does." He got up, went to the desk in the corner of the main room, and started pulling out papers. He stacked them on the table without sorting them. The stack, when he finished, was nearly 4 inches thick. She looked at it, looked at him. "Make more coffee," she said. "This will take most of the morning." Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. Almost. "Yes, ma'am," he said, and went to the stove. They worked through the stack together, him identifying documents. He recognized her, reading the ones he wasn't certain about, both of them cross-referencing against the ledger entries she had already mapped. Amos and Dale came in at sunrise, ate the breakfast she had already prepared, and left warming on the back of the stove. Looked at the document-covered table, with the particular wariness of young men sensing that something important was happening, that they did not fully understand, and went outside without being asked. By mid-morning, she had found 2 additional documents that hadn't been in the desk and hadn't been in the ledger: a fee schedule addendum to the secondary note dated 14 months after the original signing, and a modification notice that had changed the interest calculation method on the secondary balance without changing the stated interest rate. She set them side by side, looked at them, looked at Cole. "Did you sign these?" she said. He looked at both documents. His jaw shifted. "I signed the first one. I don't remember signing the second." "The signature on the second one is yours." He looked more carefully. "It looks like mine." "Does it look exactly like yours?" A pause. He looked again. And then something changed in his face, a slow, cold clarity, the kind that arrives when a man understands not just that he has been wronged, but the specific mechanism of how. "It ain't right," he said. "The way I write my name, the L in Larimer, I carry the tail down further than that." Nora picked up the modification notice with 2 fingers carefully and set it in a separate stack to the left of everything else. "That stack," she said, "is potentially more valuable than everything in the ledger." "Someone forged my signature," he said. Flat, not a question. "That's what it looks like," she said. "Which changes the nature of this considerably. This is no longer just a predatory clause. If that signature was forged, Martin Seal has committed fraud." Cole was very still. She had noticed that about him when other men would pace or raise their voices or put their fists through something. Cole Larimer went still. The anger went inward rather than outward, and it came out cold and focused rather than hot and scattered. "How do we use that?" he said. "Carefully," she said. "We don't lead with it. We file the assessment and the corrected accounting first that protects the ranch, regardless of what happens with the forgery question. Then we take the modification notice to someone who can verify the signature scientifically. If it's confirmed as forged, we take it to the county sheriff and the federal land office simultaneously." "Federal," he said. "Land fraud that crosses a certain threshold becomes a federal matter," she said. "If Seal has done this to your ranch, he has likely done it elsewhere. A federal investigation is not something he can shut down locally." Cole looked at the document in the separate stack. Then he looked at her. "You know a lot about this," he said. "I've seen it before," she said. "Once. A long time ago." He waited. She hadn't offered more, and he didn't push, and she noted that too, the way he waited without pressing, the way he understood that some information was given in its own time. "I was 26, she said after a moment. "Working as a file clerk. I found a clause like this one and brought it to my supervisor. He told me I was misreading it." She paused. "I wasn't." "What happened?" "The man went to prison eventually," she said. 3 years after I flagged it. 3 more ranches lost in between." Cole was quiet. "And you remembered it?" "I remember everything I read," she said. "It's both a gift and a significant inconvenience." He looked at her for a moment with an expression she still couldn't fully classify. Then he said, "I'm glad you answered the advertisement." It was a simple statement, plainly delivered. She felt it land somewhere she hadn't been expecting it to land, and she turned back to the documents before that feeling had time to develop into anything she'd have to account for. "Let's get through the rest of this stack," she said. The afternoon brought a problem she hadn't anticipated. She was cross-referencing the fee schedule addendum against the original note terms when she found a discrepancy in the original note itself, not in the secondary note, but in the primary bank loan. A payment record showing a full installment received by the bank 14 months ago, which did not appear anywhere in Cole's personal records. "Did you make a payment in March of last year that wasn't your scheduled amount?" she said. Cole looked up from the water rights survey she had asked him to locate. "No." "Did anyone make a payment on your behalf without your knowledge?" A pause. "Not that I know of." "Someone made a payment to the bank in your name," she said. "A payment that reduced your primary balance faster than your scheduled timeline. That sounds like a benefit, but it isn't." She set her pencil down. "If your primary balance was reduced ahead of schedule, it changes the ratio calculation between your primary and secondary debt, which pushes the secondary note to a higher percentage of total outstanding debt. Which moves the ratio in Seal's favor," Cole said. She looked at him. He had followed that faster than she had expected. "Yes," she said. "Someone paid down my bank loan to help Seal's clause trigger," he said. "That is what the numbers suggest." "Who has access to my bank account?" "That is the question I can't answer from here," she said. "We need the bank records, all of them, going back 5 years. He was already standing. "Harlan Creek Bank opens at 8 tomorrow." "I know," she said. "I'll go with you." He stopped, looked at her. "You don't have to, Mr. Larimer," she said. "I am going with you. I know what to ask for and how to read what they give us." A bank teller presented with an angry rancher who doesn't know the specific document names will hand over as little as possible and call it complete. "I know the document names." He held her gaze for a moment. Then, "All right," he said. Nothing more, but something in the way he said it. The absence of argument, the immediate adjustment, told her something she tucked away without examining too closely. He was a man who could recognize when someone else knew something better than he did, and who was capable of stepping back without it costing him anything he couldn't afford. That was rarer than it should have been. Supper that evening was quieter than usual, but it was not uncomfortable quiet. It was the quiet of two people who had spent the day doing difficult, focused work together and had run low on words without running low on anything essential. Amos and Dale ate fast, sensed the atmosphere without being able to name it, and excused themselves early. The door closed behind them. The kitchen settled. Nora was making a final notation when Cole said without preamble, "My wife's name was Eleanor." She looked up. He was looking at his coffee cup. "She died 4 years back," he said. "February. Fever came on fast. 3 days and she was gone." He paused. "Seal approached me in April of that same year." Nora set her pencil down. "I wasn't—" He stopped, started again. "I wasn't in a position to be reading page 3 of anything in April of that year. I was in a position of trying to remember to eat." "I know," she said. "I should have read it." "Mr. Larimer," she said, and waited until he looked at her. "You were approached by a man who waited specifically until you were in that position. He chose his timing deliberately. The failure here is his, not yours." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he looked back at his coffee. "Eleanor would have read page 3, he said. It was not self-pity. It was simply a fact stated with the particular precision of someone who had known a person well and still felt the specific shape of their absence. "She sounds like she was very capable," Nora said. "She was," he said. "She ran this place. I ran the cattle. We had an arrangement." He paused. "I didn't know how much of it was her until she was gone." Nora looked at her notebook, then back at him. "You've kept it running for 4 years alone," she said. "That's not nothing." "Barely," he said. "Barely counts," she said. He was quiet. And then after a moment, "Why did your husband's business fail?" She was surprised not that he asked, but that the question landed without feeling intrusive. He asked the way she asked about ledger entries. Plainly, because he wanted to understand the actual situation. "It didn't fail," she said. "He died. Hart gave out on a Tuesday morning in the middle of an argument about a grain shipment." She paused. "The business was his in name. I had been running the accounts for 11 years. When he died, his brother came from Cincinnati and took over the business, and I was informed that my services were no longer required since my employment had been informal, and I had no documented claim to any of the operation. Cole was looking at her now. You had no claim to the business you'd been running. I had no claim to anything, she said. The house, the accounts, the client relationships, all of it was in his name. My name appeared on nothing. She looked at her hands. I had 11 years of competence that belonged to someone else, and no way to prove it except my own word. And nobody took your word. Nobody asked for it, she said. That's slightly different. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, the advertisement I placed, he said. Practical arrangement, no sentiment required. Yes. I wrote that because I didn't want... He stopped, chose different words. After Eleanor, I wasn't looking for anything. I just needed someone who could do the work, someone capable. He paused. I didn't expect you to be this. What is this? She said. He looked at her steadily. Someone who's been carrying someone else's work her whole life and never once put it down, he said. She felt that land somewhere specific. She didn't answer because the answer she had was not one she was ready to say out loud. We should get an early start tomorrow, she said. Yes, he said. We should. Neither of them moved for another moment. Outside, the wind was picking up off the flats, the kind that came in the deep part of the night when the temperature dropped and the land released the day's heat. She could hear it against the window. Then she picked up her notebook and went to bed. And she lay there in the east-facing room for a long time before she slept, listening to the wind and running numbers in her head because numbers were safe. Numbers stayed where you put them, and the thought she was trying not to have could not compete with a well-constructed calculation. She was not entirely sure that was still true. The Harlan Creek Bank opened at 8 in the morning, and they were on the road by 6. Cole drove. She sat beside him on the wagon seat with her satchel in her lap, and the most important documents, the secondary note, the modification notice, with the questionable signature, the fee schedule addendum wrapped in oilcloth inside the satchel close to her body. The morning was cold enough that she could see her breath. They didn't talk much on the road. She had her notebook open on her knee and was going through the list of documents she intended to request. He drove. The horses knew the road. At some point, about 4 miles out, she said without looking up, When we get to the bank, let me do the talking initially. If the clerk gets difficult, tell me and I'll adjust. But I want to establish what we're asking for before personalities become a factor. All right, he said. And if we see seal, she said, we don't acknowledge the secondary note. As far as anyone in that building knows, we're there for routine account documentation. He glanced at her. You think he'll be there? Harlan Creek is not a large town, she said. Martin Seal holds a note on a ranch in this county. He uses the local bank. It's possible. Cole's hands tightened slightly on the reins. She noticed. If he is there, she said, you say nothing to him. Nora. His voice was flat. It was the first time he had used her given name. She registered it without turning her head. I understand the impulse, she said. I'm asking you to save it for the right moment. The right moment is not a bank lobby. A pause. All right, he said. Reluctant, but all right. The bank clerk was a young man named Wilbur, with the specific anxiety of someone who had been told his job was to provide good service and had interpreted this to mean making as few decisions as possible. He looked at Nora when she stated what they needed: full account records for the past 5 years, all payment history, all external transactions against the Larimer account, and then looked at Cole and then back at Nora. Are you? He stopped, reconsidered. Is this lady authorized to? She is, Cole said. She's the account manager for the Larimer Ranch operation, Nora said. As of 3 weeks ago. The records we are requesting are relevant to an ongoing audit of the ranch accounts. We require the complete payment history, including all third-party transactions. That is a standard request under the terms of property account management. Wilbur looked uncertain. "I'll need to speak with Mr. Carey." "Please do," she said pleasantly. Mr. Carey was the bank manager, a man in his 50s, with the permanently tired expression of someone who had been managing other people's money for long enough to have lost most of his faith in other people. He came out from his office, looked at Nora, looked at Cole, and said, "Larimer, what's this about?" "Account audit," Cole said. "We need the full payment records." Carey looked at Nora again. "And you are Nora Voss, account manager for the ranch." She opened her satchel and placed on the counter the written agreement she and Cole had signed on her first day the employment contract, which she had taken the precaution of having witnessed by Amos Pruitt and noting as account management. She had done this on day 3 quietly without explaining why. She explained why now. "The account management agreement specifies my authority to request documentation relevant to the ranch operation. I'd like the payment records for the past 5 years, all external transactions, and any notations in the account file regarding third-party payments." Carey looked at the contract, looked at Cole. "This is what you want." "That's what we want," Cole said. He was quiet for another moment, the way bank managers are quiet when they are calculating what they are legally required to do versus what they would prefer to do. Then he nodded at Wilbur and went back to his office. Wilbur brought the records in 3 separate folders. Nora signed the request log, took the folders to the counter along the side wall, and opened the first one. She found it in 11 minutes. A payment of $460 made against the Larimer primary account on March 14th of the previous year. The payment notation listed the source as third-party remittance Seal Holdings. She looked at it, read it again, set her finger on the line. "Cole," she said quietly. He came to the counter. She pointed to the line without speaking. He read it. She watched his face. He said nothing for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was very controlled. "He paid down my loan himself," he said. "To accelerate the ratio shift," she said. "Yes. He used his own money to set up his own trigger, which means he was certain the scheme would work," she said. "He was certain no one would find it. He invested in it." She photographed the entry in her notebook, copying it out in full exact date and all. "This is the piece we needed. This is direct documented evidence that the payment was made by Seal Holdings against your account without your authorization. That is not a gray area. That is actionable." She closed the folder. Her hands were steady. Her heart was doing something more complicated, but that was not information anyone else needed. "We have what we came for," she said. "We leave now before anyone in this building has a reason to remember this visit clearly." Cole picked up the oilcloth satchel. She picked up her notebook. They walked to the door with the careful, ordinary pace of 2 people who had just made a routine transaction. She did not look at Wilbur. She did not look at Mr. Carey's office window. She pushed through the bank's front door into the cold morning air and stopped. Martin Seal was standing on the boardwalk directly across the street. He was a man of perhaps 55, well-dressed in the way that men with local power dressed in small county towns, not extravagantly, but with the kind of careful quality that communicated he could afford better, and had chosen this as appropriate. He had a full gray beard, trimmed close, and the particular posture of someone who moved through spaces that he believed belonged to him. He was looking directly at them. She did not stop walking. She adjusted her grip on the satchel and continued toward the wagon at the same pace without any change in her expression. Beside her, Cole had gone completely still in the particular way he went still when his anger was running cold. "Keep walking," she said under her breath. "Eyes forward." He walked. She felt the effort of it beside her, the specific physical tension of a man overriding a powerful instinct. But he walked. They reached the wagon. He helped her up onto the seat the first time he had done that, and she noted it. This was not the moment to think about it, and climbed up himself. She did not look across the street. She opened her notebook to the page with the payment record she had just copied and held her pencil above it, as though reviewing a notation, and she said quietly, "Is he still watching?" "Yes," Cole said. "Drive normally," she said. "We are 2 people leaving the bank after an ordinary transaction. Nothing has changed. Nothing he needs to know about has happened. Cole clicked to the horses. The wagon moved. She kept her eyes on the notebook. When they had turned the corner and the bank was behind them, she let herself breathe. "He knows we were there," Cole said. "He knows we went to the bank," she said. "He doesn't know what we found. And by the time he tries to find out, we will have already filed the assessment request and the account dispute with the county land office." She looked up from the notebook. "We go there directly, right now, before we go back to the ranch." "That was always the plan," he said. "Yes," she said. "But now there's less margin." He said nothing. He drove. And she returned to the notebook and the numbers and tried not to think about the way Martin Seal had been standing in the street looking at them with the expression she had recognized from too far away to read clearly, but understood by its posture alone. The expression of a man who has just realized that something he assumed was under control may not be. Good, she thought with a precision that surprised her. Let him feel that. The county land office was staffed by a woman named Mrs. Aldridge, who turned out to be 60 years old, brisk, efficient, and deeply unimpressed with anyone who came through her door expecting favors. Nora liked her immediately. She laid out the assessment request in clear, complete terms. Mrs. Aldridge asked 4 direct questions, received 4 direct answers, and stamped the request without ceremony. "Assessment will be on record within 7 working days," she said. "You want a copy of the filing receipt?" "Please," Nora said. Mrs. Aldridge produced one. Nora signed it. Cole signed it. Mrs. Aldridge filed her copy and handed them theirs. "Anything else?" Mrs. Aldridge said. "Yes," Nora said. "I need to file a formal notation of disputed terms on a secondary promissory note attached to this property." She laid the secondary note with her written dispute notation attached on the counter. Mrs. Aldridge looked at it, looked at Nora. "You do this kind of work regular?" "When it's necessary," Nora said. Mrs. Aldridge stamped the dispute filing without further comment. The entire transaction took 18 minutes. Outside on the steps of the county land office, with the filing receipt folded into the oilcloth in her satchel, and the dispute notation now officially on record. Nora Voss allowed herself exactly 3 seconds of something that was not quite relief and not quite satisfaction, but lived in the same neighborhood. Then she straightened, adjusted the satchel strap, and turned to Cole. "Step 1 and Step 2 are done," she said. "The affidavit is next. We need to do that at the sheriff's office with a witness before the end of the week." He was looking at her with an expression she had been cataloging for weeks without fully naming. She had been calling it assessment in her internal accounting because that was the safe word for it. But standing here in the cold morning air of Harlan Creek, with the filing receipt in her satchel and Martin Seal's expression in her memory, she thought maybe assessment was not quite the right word. He said, "I want to show you something when we get back." She waited. "Eleanor's garden," he said. "North side of the house. I've been keeping it up." He paused. "I don't know why I'm telling you that." She looked at him. "I'd like to see it," she said. He nodded once. They walked to the wagon. The ride back was quieter than the ride in, but it was a different quality of quiet, not the focused efficiency of 2 people running toward a deadline, but something that had more room in it, more space, as though the urgency still entirely present had shifted slightly to make room for 1 or 2 things that were not the work. She did not analyze that. She was very deliberately not analyzing it. She opened her notebook to a clean page and wrote, "Step 3 Affidavit Sheriff's Office this week" at the top, and underlined it twice and told herself that was why she was smiling. She was not entirely convincing. The affidavit took 2 hours. Not because the sheriff's office made it difficult. Sheriff Brandt was a man of 60, with the permanent squint of someone who had spent decades reading people in bad light, and he listened to Nora's explanation of the document situation, with the focused attention of a man who had seen enough of Martin Seal's name in county business to find this particular conversation unsurprising. But the affidavit itself required precision, and precision required time, and Nora was not willing to file a document that left a single, interpretable gap. She drafted it at the sheriff's desk, while Cole sat across from her, and Brant stood near the window with his arms crossed and read over her shoulder without being invited, which she permitted, because his eyes were sharp and he caught one phrasing error she had nearly missed. "That clause," Brant said, pointing at a line near the bottom of the draft. "The way you've written it, a careful lawyer could argue the disclosure question is separate from the fraud question. You want those tied together in the same sentence." She looked at the line. He was right. She rewrote it. "You do this kind of work before," Brant said. "In a different capacity," she said. He straightened up. "Martin Seal has had his name on 3 property transactions in this county in the past 6 years. 2 of them went quiet before they got to my office. One of them, the Hadley place east of Creekwood, the family just left. Packed up one February and didn't come back." Cole looked at him. "You think Seal ran them out?" "I think the Hadleys left owing less than they should have and arrived at wherever they went with nothing," Brant said. "I couldn't prove anything. The documentation was all in order on the surface." He looked at Nora. "The kind of in order that only looks wrong if you know what you're looking at." "I know what I'm looking at," she said. "I can see that," he said. "Finish the affidavit. I'll witness it myself." Cole signed it. Brant witnessed it. Nora kept the original and filed a copy with the sheriff's office records. Walking out into the cold afternoon air, Cole said nothing for a long moment. Then, "The Hadleys had 2 daughters." "I know," she said. She didn't know, but she understood what he meant. This was not abstract. It had happened to real people, and it would keep happening until someone stopped it. "We're going to stop it," she said. He looked at her. "You sound certain." "I am certain," she said. "The documentation is airtight. What we filed today in combination with what we filed this morning, Seal cannot trigger the clause cleanly. He would have to challenge our assessment filing and our dispute notation simultaneously in court, before a judge who will be looking at a forged signature and an unauthorized third-party payment made by Seal Holdings against your account." She paused. He could try. It would not go well for him. Cole was quiet. Then, "What if he doesn't try through the courts?" She looked at him. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if he decides the legal route is closed and finds another way to make this difficult?" She held his gaze. "That's a different problem," she said, "and we should be prepared for it." They drove back to the ranch in the thin, late afternoon light, and Nora spent the ride thinking about the way Martin Seal had stood on that boardwalk and watched them leave the bank. He had not looked surprised. That was what stayed with her. He had looked like a man recalibrating. She saw the garden that evening, as Cole had promised. It was on the north side of the house, enclosed by a low wooden rail that had been repaired recently. New wood on 2 sections still pale against the weathered gray of the older boards. Whatever Eleanor had planted there had been maintained with careful, consistent attention. The structure of it, the spacing, the order was clearly someone else's design. But the upkeep was Cole's. She could see that in the way the edges were kept, in the fact that the supports for the climbing plants had been replaced where they'd rotted without being changed in any other way. He had preserved the shape of something she had built. She stood at the rail and didn't say anything for a moment. "She planted most of it the first spring we were here," Cole said. He was standing beside her, not touching the rail. "Said the land needed to know someone intended to stay." "Did it work?" Nora said. "I'm still here," he said. "Reckon something worked." She looked at the garden, then at him. "You've kept it exactly as she left it." "I've kept it alive," he said. "That's as much as I know how to do with it." He paused. "Some mornings I come out here and I still—" He stopped. "I'm not sure what I come out here for exactly. It just seems like the right thing to do." Nora said, "That makes sense to me." He looked at her. "Does it?" "Yes," she said. "Some things you tend because they deserve to be tended, not because you've finished grieving, not because you've figured out what comes next, just because they deserve it." He was quiet for a moment. "You're talking about more than the garden," he said. "Probably," she said. They stood there in the cold for another minute, and it was the most comfortable minute of silence she had experienced since she couldn't remember when. Then she said, "I need to write the letter to the Federal Land Office tonight. The forgery question needs to be on their radar before Seal has any reason to think we've identified it." "All right," he said. "But thank you," she said, "for showing me." He nodded once. They went inside. The letter to the Federal Land Office took her 3 hours. She wrote it twice, the first draft too direct about the forgery allegation, which risked prompting an immediate visible investigation that could alert Seal before their county filings had fully processed. The second draft was more careful. She framed it as a request for guidance on documentation standards for secondary promissory notes in land transactions, with an appended notation about a specific irregularity she had encountered that might warrant federal attention. She included a certified copy of the modification notice with the questionable signature, not the original, which she kept, and requested a response at the Harlan Creek Sheriff's Office rather than the ranch address. She sealed it at 11 at night, set it on the table where she would not forget it in the morning, and then sat in the quiet kitchen and looked at the wall and allowed herself for the first time to consider the possibility that something was going wrong with her careful internal accounting. She had been at this ranch for 3 weeks. She had arrived with $17.40 and a determination to feel nothing that wasn't useful. She had a job. She had a room facing east. She had a problem to solve. Those were the parameters. The parameters had not changed. And yet, Cole refilling her coffee. The garden he had kept alive because some things deserved to be tended. The way he had said, "I'm glad you answered the advertisement plainly," the way he said everything without decoration or motive, just the fact of it. She was not 25. She was not inexperienced. She was a woman who had been married for 11 years and had cataloged over that time the precise distance between a man who needed something from you and a man who simply noticed you. Noticed you the way you noticed a number that didn't fit the expected pattern. Not with want exactly, with attention. Cole Larimer noticed her with attention. She picked up her pencil and opened her notebook to the document timeline and refused to continue that thought. 4 days later, everything changed. She was in the kitchen at mid-morning when Amos came in from the road at a speed that was not his usual pace, pulled off his hat, and said, "Ma'am, there's a man at the gate asking for Mr. Larimer. Says he's from Seal Holdings." She set down her pencil. "Where's Cole?" "South pasture." "Go get him," she said. "Don't run. Walk. And tell the man at the gate that Mr. Larimer is on his way." She paused. What does this man look like? Young, well-dressed, carrying a document case. A document case. She looked at the papers on the table, then at the clock. It had been 4 days since the bank. 4 days since Seal had seen them on the boardwalk. She had estimated he would move within the week, but she had hoped for closer to 7 days. She had 4 days. She went to the shelf, took down the oilcloth package, and removed 3 documents from it. The filing receipt from the county land office, the copy of the assessment request with Mrs. Aldridge's stamp, and the dispute notation filing receipt. She set them in a neat stack in the center of the table. Then she put the kettle on and sat down and waited. Cole came in through the back door 5 minutes later. He read her face before she said a word. "What is it?" he said. "Seal's man is at the gate with a document case," she said. "Sit down. I need 30 seconds." He sat. She told him they would receive whatever the man brought. They would not discuss the bank visit. They would not reference the federal letter. They would not show the document stack on the table unless the man's documents made it strategically necessary. They would be polite, cooperative, and entirely unrevealing. "Can you do that?" she said. "I can do whatever is necessary," he said. "Good." She stood. "Let him in." The man from Seal Holdings was named Fletcher. He was perhaps 30, with the careful clothing and careful manners of someone who understood his job was to deliver something unwelcome and had been trained to do it without provoking an immediate response. He came in, accepted the offer of coffee with a small nod, set his document case on the table, and opened it. "Mr. Larimer." he said. "I've been asked to deliver this correspondence from Mr. Martin Seal regarding the terms of the secondary promissory note attached to this property." He laid a sealed envelope on the table. "Mr. Seal wanted to ensure you were aware that the note is approaching a threshold condition and that he is prepared to discuss settlement options if you'd prefer to resolve the matter privately rather than through a formal process." Nora watched Cole's face. He had it entirely under control. He looked at the envelope the way he looked at things he was going to deal with directly without performance. "I'll read it," Cole said. "Of course," Fletcher said. "Mr. Seal also wanted me to convey that he has significant respect for the Larimer operation and would prefer a resolution that allows the ranch to continue." "I'll read the letter," Cole said. The second time was quieter. Fletcher stopped talking. Cole opened the envelope. "Read it." His expression did not change. He set it on the table and looked at Nora. She read it, kept her face neutral. The letter was precise, politely written, and functionally a warning shot. Seal had not yet filed a petition, but the letter noted specifically with dates and figures that the debt-to-value ratio on the property was approaching the clause threshold, and that Seal was prepared to exercise his legal rights under the secondary note in the absence of satisfactory resolution. He proposed a meeting at his Harlan Creek office within 10 days to discuss terms. In the margin of the letter, in a different hand, Seal's own, she suspected, were 3 words "clock is running." She set the letter down. "Fletcher," she said pleasantly, "would you let Mr. Seal know that Mr. Larimer has received the correspondence and will be in touch directly?" Fletcher looked at her. He had not been told there would be a woman at this table, and he was recalibrating with the particular visible effort of a young man who had been trained for one scenario and was now in a different one. "I'll pass that along," he said. "Thank you," she said. "Let me show you out." She walked him to the door and waited until the sound of his horse had faded. Then she came back to the table, sat down, and picked up the filing receipt from the county land office. "He doesn't know," she said. Cole looked at her. "The letter was written before he knew we'd been to the bank," she said. "Look at the date. It was written 2 days ago. He saw us leaving the bank yesterday, but the letter was already drafted, which means he's been planning to send this regardless." She set the receipt on top of the letter. "He also doesn't know about the assessment filing or the dispute notation. He still thinks the clause is clean." "So we're ahead of him," Cole said. "We're ahead of him," she said. "But not by as much as I'd like." She looked at the clock, then at the stack of documents, then at Cole. "I need to make a decision," she said. "And I need to make it now, so I want your opinion." He looked at her steadily. "We can wait for the assessment to complete 7 working days," Mrs. Aldridge said, "and then respond to Seal's meeting request from a position of complete documentation. That's the safer path. Or we can accelerate. I can request an expedited assessment on grounds of active legal pressure, which requires an additional filing, but could cut the timeline to 3 days. The risk is that an expedited request is more visible. If Seal has any connection to the assessor's office—" "He does," Cole said. She stopped. "How do you know that?" "Gerald Marsh is the county assessor," Cole said. "Martin Seal was best man at Gerald Marsh's wedding 11 years ago." She looked at him. Then she looked at the filing receipt with Mrs. Aldridge's stamp. "Does Marsh have direct access to the assessment request files?" "He runs the office," Cole said. She was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. Then she stood up, picked up her satchel, and began putting documents into it. "We're going back to Harlan Creek," she said. "Now. Right now," she said. "We need to talk to Mrs. Aldridge before Marsh sees our filing and finds a reason to delay or redirect it." Cole was already on his feet. "I'll get the horses." She was at the door before him. "Faster than the wagon," she said. "We ride." He looked at her, one quick look that was not surprise exactly, more like adjustment, like updating something he'd thought he knew about her. And then he was out the door, and she was behind him, satchel over her shoulder, moving at a pace that did not allow for second thoughts. Mrs. Aldridge was at her desk when they came through the door of the county land office, at a speed that was not quite running, but was faster than anyone usually entered a government office. She looked up, looked at Nora, looked at the expression on Nora's face. "Close the door," Mrs. Aldridge said. Nora closed it. "Gerald Marsh," Nora said, "has a personal relationship with Martin Seal." Mrs. Aldridge's expression did not change, but something behind it did a very slight, very controlled shift, like the movement of water under a frozen surface. "I'm aware of that relationship," she said. "Our assessment filing," Nora said. "Does Marsh have access to it?" A pause. "He has access to all filings that come through this office," Mrs. Aldridge said carefully. "Has he seen it?" Another pause. Longer. "He was in the files yesterday afternoon," Mrs. Aldridge said. "Standard review. I don't know specifically what he looked at." Nora set her hands flat on the counter. "Mrs. Aldridge, I need to know if that filing is secure." Mrs. Aldridge looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, "My office maintains complete and accurate records of every document filed with this office, every stamp, every receipt, every date of filing. Those records are maintained independently of Mr. Marsh's review process." A pause. "I have been in this position for 19 years. I have my own filing system which predates Mr. Marsh's tenure by 11 years and which is maintained by me personally." Nora understood. "Is our filing in your system?" "It is," Mrs. Aldridge said, "stamped, dated, and cross-referenced, as of 2 days ago." Nora exhaled. One breath. "If someone attempted to remove or alter the filing from the general records, my system would still show it," Mrs. Aldridge said. "And my system is the one that would be presented in any legal proceeding, because I am the one who would be called to testify, and I have 19 years of unimpeachable record-keeping to stand behind." She looked at Nora with the steady, dry expression of a woman who had been doing her job correctly for a very long time and had no intention of stopping. "Does that answer your question?" "Yes," Nora said. "Thank you. One more thing," Mrs. Aldridge said. She opened her desk drawer and took out a sealed envelope. "A gentleman came in this morning asking about any recent assessment filings related to properties on Creekwood Road. I told him I couldn't discuss specific filings with parties who were not the filing principals." She set the envelope on the counter. "He left a card. I kept it because I thought you might want to know." Nora opened the envelope. Inside was a business card. "Martin Seal, Seal Holdings, Harlan Creek County." She looked at it for a moment. Then she set it in her satchel. "He was here this morning," Cole said. His voice was very flat. "He was here at 9:15, Mrs. Aldridge said. "You filed at 8:43 yesterday morning. He had come the morning after seeing them at the bank. He had moved faster than she'd estimated by nearly 2 full days." She recalculated in her head the dispute notation, the affidavit at the sheriff's office, the federal letter, and felt the margin tighten. "We're still ahead," she said, half to Cole and half to herself. "But not by much," Cole said. "No," she said. "Not by much." She thanked Mrs. Aldridge. They went back out into the street. "He's going to challenge the assessment filing," Cole said, "through Marsh." "He's going to try," she said. "But Mrs. Aldridge's independent record makes that significantly more difficult. He'd have to discredit 19 years of her record-keeping to make it look like our filing came in after the threshold triggered." She paused. "He might try anyway." "So what do we do?" She stood on the street in the cold Harlan Creek morning and thought. Around them, the town moved at its ordinary pace, people who didn't know what was unfolding 2 feet away from them, and she thought about the Hadley family who had packed up one February and not come back, and about the 3 words in the margin of Seal's letter, and about the forged signature on the modification notice sitting in oilcloth in her satchel. "We take the forgery to Sheriff Brandt today," she said, "not as a supporting document, as the primary complaint." Cole looked at her. "I thought you wanted to lead with the civil filing." "I did," she said. But Seal is moving faster than I planned, for which means we need to move faster than I planned for. The forgery complaint opens a criminal investigation. A criminal investigation puts a hold on any civil proceeding Seal initiates while the investigation is active. She looked at Cole. He cannot file a legal petition to seize your property while he is under active criminal investigation for fraud in connection with that property. Cole was quiet for a moment. That stops him. That stops him, she said. Long enough for the assessment to complete, and the federal letter to be received, and the full civil documentation to be ironclad. And if Brant doesn't move on it fast enough. Brant told us himself he's been watching Seal's name in county business for years, she said. He'll move on it. Cole looked at her steadily. You changed the whole strategy in 48 hours. The situation changed, she said. The strategy follows the situation. He was quiet. Then, Nora. She looked at him. I need you to know something, he said. It was the deliberate tone, the one he used when he had decided to say something and was going to say it completely. When I placed that advertisement, I was trying to solve a practical problem. I was not looking for... He paused. I had stopped expecting things to be other than they were. She waited. You came in and read my ledger before you agreed to anything, he said. You reorganized the dry goods shelf without telling me. You found a fraud in my accounts that I would have lost this ranch over, and you found it in 2 weeks and you didn't leave. He paused again. I want you to know that I see that. All of it. I see what you've done here. She looked at him for a long moment. The street noise continued around them. A horse somewhere. 2 men talking on the steps of the feed store. The ordinary texture of a town moving through an ordinary morning. I know you see it, she said. I've known for a while. He held her gaze. And? She picked up the satchel. And we have a forgery complaint to file, she said. The corner of his mouth moved. That almost smile. Yes, ma'am, he said, and they walked toward the sheriff's office.
Doctor.
Brant listened to the forgery complaint without interrupting. He looked at the modification notice with the questionable signature. He looked at it for a long time. Then he said, I'll need a handwriting comparison sample. Something Cole signed around the same period. Nora opened her satchel and produced a letter Cole had written to the bank. In the same year as the modification notice, she had found it in the document stack on day 2, and kept it precisely because handwriting comparison might eventually matter. She set it beside the modification notice. Brant looked at both. He was not a document examiner, but he had been reading people and their paperwork for 30 years, and she watched him see what she had seen. The L in Larimer, he said. Yes, she said. He looked at Cole. You're certain this is not your signature? I'm certain, Cole said. I know how I write my name. Brant set both documents down. I'm going to send these to the territorial examiner for formal verification. That takes time. But I can open a formal inquiry today, which creates an official record that a complaint has been filed. He looked at them. A formal inquiry into a fraud allegation complicates any civil filing Seal attempts to make regarding this property in the meantime. That's what I was counting on, Nora said. Figured it was, he said. He picked up his pen. She watched him write out the inquiry form with the careful hand of someone who understood that what he was putting on paper would matter. Outside, she could hear the town. Inside, she was running the timeline in her head. One more time, assessment dispute notation. Affidavit, federal letter, now criminal inquiry, and the picture that formed was beginning to look the way she had originally designed it to look. Almost. There was still one piece she hadn't been able to account for, and it had been sitting in the back of her mind since Amos had come in that morning with news of the man at the gate. Seal had moved faster than expected because he had seen them at the bank, and he had gone to Mrs. Aldridge the very next morning, which meant his response time was shorter than she had built into her model, which meant that somewhere in the sequence she had constructed there was a gap. Small, but there. She looked at the window of the sheriff's office while Brant finished the inquiry form. Then she looked at the oilcloth satchel. Then she thought about the Hadley family and the two other transactions Brant had mentioned, and about the word recalibrating that she had used privately to describe Seal's expression on the boardwalk. A man who recalibrated was a man who had backup plans. She needed to know what his backup plan was before he needed to use it. "Sheriff," she said while Brant was still writing. "The two other property transactions you mentioned, the ones that went quiet before they reached your office. Do you have documentation on either of them?" Brant looked up. "Some?" "I'd like to see it," she said. "If you're willing." He looked at her for a moment with those sharp, tired eyes. "You think there's a pattern that extends beyond this property. I think Martin Seal is a careful man who has done this more than twice," she said. "And I think a careful man who has done something more than twice has a method. And if I understand the method, I can predict what he does when his primary approach is blocked." Brant set down his pen, looked at Cole. Cole said nothing, just held his gaze steadily, which was apparently enough. Brant opened the bottom drawer of his desk. He took out a folder that was thicker than it should have been for two quiet transactions. He set it on the desk. "I've been keeping this for 3 years," he said, "waiting for someone to walk in here who could read it correctly." He looked at Nora. "I think that might be you." She reached across and took the folder. She opened it, and the first page made her breath stop, because it was not documentation about the Hadley property. It was a map, a hand-drawn survey map of this entire section of the county, with properties marked in 2 colors. Red for properties where Seal had active notes, and blue for something else, a corridor. She realized, her eyes tracing the line of it running directly through the properties marked in red, running directly through Larimer Ranch. She looked up at Brant. "What is the blue line?" Brant said. "Railroad." She looked back at the map. "There's a rail corridor survey been filed with the territorial government," Brant said. "Proposed route runs from the northern pass straight down through this section of the county. It was surveyed 18 months ago." He paused. "The survey was commissioned by a holding company out of Denver. I spent 6 months trying to find out who owns that holding company." He paused again. "The answer is in the back of the folder." She turned to the back of the folder. 1 page. A corporate ownership filing from the Denver Territorial Office. She read the name at the top. Seal Land and Development Holdings. She sat very still. This was not about a predatory clause. This was not about one rancher and one bad debt. Martin Seal had been systematically acquiring legal leverage over every property in the path of a railroad corridor he intended to profit from. And when the railroad came through, those properties would either be sold to the railroad at his terms, or condemned with him holding the debt instruments that entitled him to the settlement payments. He didn't want to own the ranches. He wanted to own the debt when the railroad bought the land. It was elegant in the way that genuinely terrible things sometimes were. And it had been running for years. She closed the folder, set it on the desk, looked at Brant, looked at Cole. "This changes the filing strategy," she said. Her voice was steady. "We are no longer dealing with a local fraud case. This is a territorial matter involving a systematic scheme across multiple properties." She turned to Brant. "How many families are still on their land in this corridor?" Brant thought. 4 that I know of, including you," he said to Cole. 4 families, and Seal had leverage on all of them. "Then we have to move on all of it at once," she said. "The federal letter I sent needs to be followed up immediately with a full account of the corridor scheme. The other families, they need to know what's happening. They need the same protection we've been building." "You can't do 4 sets of filings simultaneously," Cole said. "Not an argument, a practical observation." "No," she said. "But I can write the framework and Sheriff Brant can carry it to the other properties with documentation." She looked at Brant. "Will you do that?" Brant looked at her for a long time. "I've been waiting 3 years to do exactly that," he said. "Yes." She opened her notebook to a clean page. Then she stopped. She looked at Cole. He was watching her with that attention she had stopped calling assessment in her internal accounting because she had run out of ways to make that word fit what it actually was. "We're going to be here a while," she said. "I ain't going anywhere," he said. She looked at him for one moment, just one allowed herself that, and then she turned to the clean page and started writing. Outside, Harlan Creek went about its afternoon. And in the sheriff's office, without ceremony, without anyone to see it, something that had been moving slowly underground for 3 weeks broke the surface and became real. The particular moment when two people stop working parallel to each other and begin without discussing it to work as one. Neither of them said a word about it. The work was too important, and the clock was still running. And Martin Seal did not yet know that the woman he had never planned for had just found the one document that turned a defense into something else entirely. She wrote for 3 hours in Brandt's office without stopping. Not a single document. A complete framework, 4 separate property protection packages, one for each family still holding land in Seal's railroad corridor. Each package contained a template dispute notation for the secondary notes, a formal assessment request, and a cover letter explaining the railroad corridor scheme in language precise enough to hold up in a federal proceeding, but plain enough that a family with no legal background could understand what was being done to them and why. Brandt sat across from her and answered every question she asked. Cole sat to her left and did not speak unless she asked him something directly, and when she did, he answered without preamble, and she had stopped noticing how rare that was, because she had gotten used to it, which was its own kind of problem. She would deal with later. At some point, Brandt's deputy brought coffee. She drank it without looking up. "The Calloway place," she said, not lifting her pen. "How far out is that?" 6 miles east, Brandt said. "Tom Calloway's been on that land 30 years. Good man. Won't know what's coming at him." "And the Vance property?" "South of Creekwood. Family of 4. The wife handles their books." A pause. "She ain't you, but she's sharp." "Tell her everything," Nora said. "Don't summarize. She needs the full picture to protect her family correctly." "Yes, ma'am." Cole looked at Brandt saying yes, ma'am, and said nothing, but she caught the expression in her peripheral vision. Almost amusement. She kept writing. By the time she set the pen down, the light through the office window had shifted from afternoon to early evening. She flexed her right hand. Her fingers were stiff. "These 4 packages," she said, "need to be delivered in person, not sent. Delivered, explained, and left with someone who can act on them." She looked at Brandt. "That's you." "I'll start tomorrow morning," he said. "Start tonight," she said. "The Calloway place is 6 miles. You can be there and back before full dark." Brandt looked at her for a moment. Then he picked up his hat. "All right," he said. "Tonight." She stood. Gathered the documents, separated the 4 packages, with care labeled each one, and handed them to Brandt in the order she wanted them delivered. He took them without comment, which confirmed her opinion of him as a man who understood what urgency actually meant. At the door he paused. "Miss Voss," he said. "What you've built here today, the 4 packages, the corridor documentation, the framework for the federal complaint." He paused again. "Most lawyers I've known couldn't have done this in a week." "I'm not a lawyer," she said. "No," he said. "You're something more useful." And he went out. Cole was watching her. She picked up her satchel and said, "We need to go. I want to write the federal follow-up letter tonight, while the corridor documentation is clear in my head." "Nora," he said. "We still have the timeline to manage," she said. "The assessment completes in 3 days. The federal letter needs to arrive before—" "Nora," he said again. Quiet. Specific. She stopped. "You've been writing for 3 hours," he said. "Your hand is shaking." She looked at her right hand. He was not wrong. "It's fine," she said. "It ain't fine," he said. "And you know it. Come on." He held the office door open. "We're going to eat something, and then you can write the federal letter. The railroad ain't moving tonight." She looked at him. He looked back at her with those careful gray eyes and the particular steady patience of a man who had decided something and was not going to be argued out of it by someone whose hand was shaking. She went through the door. They ate at the only restaurant in Harlan Creek that was still serving at that hour, a narrow room with 6 tables run by a woman named Petra, who brought food without being asked and refilled coffee as though it were a personal mission. Cole ordered for both of them without consulting her, which under other circumstances she might have had something to say about, but she was too tired to want to make a decision. And the food when it arrived was exactly what she would have ordered anyway. She ate. He ate. Neither of them talked much. After a while she said, "I keep thinking about the Hadley family." Cole looked at her. "They packed up and left," she said. "1 February. Just left. And I keep thinking about what that morning was like. Someone waking up and deciding that the fight was over." She looked at her coffee. "I want to make sure no one else has that morning." He was quiet for a moment. "They will if you collapse before the assessment clears," he said. She looked at him. That was almost stern. "I meant it to be," he said. She felt the exhaustion settle more honestly now that she was sitting still and fed. It had been a long day. The bank, the land office, branch office, 3 hours of continuous writing. Her mind was still running calculations, but the rest of her had fallen behind. "Can I ask you something?" Cole said. "Yes." "When this is over," he said, "what do you plan to do?" She looked at him steadily. "What do you mean?" "The arrangement," he said. "You came for a practical reason. The practical problem, assuming we resolve it, will be less urgent. I'm asking what you plan to do after." She should have had an answer for that. She had been a woman who planned, who calculated, who kept clear accounts of her own situation. She had arrived at Larimer Ranch with $17 and an exit strategy she hadn't fully articulated even to herself, but which had always been present as a background assumption. This was temporary. She was passing through. The arrangement was the arrangement. She had stopped thinking about the exit strategy somewhere around the 2nd week. She hadn't noticed herself stopping. "I haven't decided," she said. He looked at her. "That's the first thing you've said since you got here that I don't believe," he said. She held his gaze. The restaurant was nearly empty now, just Petra moving quietly at the far end of the room and the low sound of the wind against the windows. "You're right," she said. "I haven't been thinking about leaving." He didn't smile. But something settled in his face, a small, quiet resolution, like a door that had been slightly open for a long time, finally deciding what it was going to do. "Good," he said. Simple. Final. And he drank his coffee. She looked at the table and felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Not happiness exactly, not relief. Something more structural. The particular sensation of a thing that had been uncertain becoming solid beneath you, the way ground feels when you've been walking on boards and you step onto actual earth. She picked up her coffee. "We should get back," she said. "I need to write that letter." "I know," he said. "Let's go." The federal follow-up letter took her 2 hours. Cole sat at the opposite end of the table reading through the corridor documentation she had assembled, occasionally asking a question, and she answered without stopping her pen. It was the most natural collaborative rhythm she had ever worked in, and she noticed that without attaching weight to it, because there was too much else to think about. She sealed the letter at just past 10. Set it with the first letter in the oilcloth. 2 letters, now both addressed to the Federal Land Office building, a sequential record of what they had found and when they had found it. "This goes out on the morning stage," she said. "I'll take it in myself," he said. She looked up. "You don't have to." "I want a record of who delivered it," he said. "Not a stage driver who handles 50 pieces of mail. Me. In person. Date and time." She looked at him. "That's good thinking," she said. "Reckon I've been around you long enough to pick some up," he said. She felt that land and let it go, and closed her notebook. 2 mornings later, she was at the table with the ledger books when she heard the horse on the road. Not a familiar pace. Faster than the ranch hands, more deliberate than a passing traveler. She looked at the clock. 7:42. Too early for a social call. She went to the window. The man riding in was not Fletcher. He was older, heavier dressed in the quality clothing she now associated with Martin Seal's circle. He had the posture of someone carrying authority, or the appearance of it. She went to the door before he had dismounted. "Can I help you?" she said. He looked at her with the particular expression of a man who had expected to deal with Cole Larimer and was recalibrating. "I'm looking for the property owner." "You're speaking with the account manager for this property," she said. "What is your business?" He reached into his coat and produced an envelope. "I have a correspondence for Mr. Larimer from Mr. Seal's legal representative." Legal representative. Not Fletcher this time. They had escalated. "I'll take it," she said. He looked uncertain. "It's addressed to the property owner," she said, "of which I am the authorized account manager with full documentation of that authority on record with the Harlan Creek County Land Office. I'll take it." He handed it over. She thanked him pleasantly, waited while he turned his horse and rode out, and then opened the envelope, standing on the porch in the cold morning air. It was a formal legal notice, signed by a man named Hargrove Attorney at Law Denver. Not a local lawyer. Denver. Seal had brought in outside counsel. The notice informed Cole Larimer that as of the date of writing, the debt-to-value ratio on the Larimer Ranch property had exceeded the threshold specified in the secondary promissory note, and that Martin Seal intended to file a formal petition for settlement within 72 hours, unless satisfactory resolution was reached. 72 hours. She read the date on the notice. It had been written 3 days ago. The delivery had taken 3 days, which meant the 72-hour window had already begun, had been running since the date of writing. She did the calculation in her head instantly. They had less than a day. She went inside, took her coat from the hook, picked up the oilcloth satchel, and went to the barn. Cole was in with the horses. He looked at her face and said nothing. Just set down what he was holding and waited. She told him. He was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. "How much time?" "If the date on this notice is accurate, and the delivery took the time I think it took, less than 20 hours. Maybe less than 16. "The assessment," he said. "Completes today," she said. "Mrs. Aldridge said 7 working days. Today is the 7th working day." She was already calculating. If the assessment is complete, and on record before Hargrove files the petition, the clause doesn't trigger. The ratio is below the threshold at current assessed value, but we need that document in our hands before Hargrove reaches the county courthouse. "Where would Hargrove file from?" Cole said. "Denver counsel filing locally, he would either file through the Harlan Creek courthouse directly or send it by stage." She looked at him. "If he sends by stage, we have more time. If he's already in Harlan Creek." "We go now," Cole said. "We go now," she said. He had the horses saddled in 7 minutes. She did not time this, but registered it. 7 minutes was fast. They rode hard. The county land office opened at 8. It was 7:51 when they tied the horses outside. Nora did not run running, communicated panic, and panic was information she did not want visible in this town. On this morning, but she walked at the fastest pace she could maintain, while still looking like a woman with ordinary business to conduct. Mrs. Aldridge was at her desk when they came through the door. She looked up, read Nora's face, and stood. "The assessment," Nora said. "Completed this morning," Mrs. Aldridge said. "I have the document here." She turned to the filing shelf behind her. "I set it aside when it came in. Expected you'd be wanting it." Nora exhaled. One breath. Mrs. Aldridge set the completed assessment on the counter. Nora read it, the full document, every line, because she did not assume anything until she had verified it personally. The assessed value was the figure she had calculated. It was on official record, stamped dated 6:47 this morning, 2 hours ago. The debt-to-value ratio at this assessed value was below the clause threshold by a margin of 11%. Seal's clause could not trigger. She looked up at Mrs. Aldridge. I need a certified copy of this document, right now. Already made one, Mrs. Aldridge said, and placed a second stamped copy on the counter beside the first. Figured you might. Nora picked up both copies. Her hands were steady. Has anyone else come in this morning asking about assessment filings for Creekwood Road properties? Mrs. Aldridge's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. A man I did not recognize came in at 7:58, before you arrived, asked to see recent assessment filings for that road. I told him I couldn't release filings to parties who were not the filing principals. She paused. He asked if I could confirm whether a specific filing had been completed. I told him I could not discuss the status of specific filings. What did he look like? 60. Well-dressed. Gray beard trimmed close. Cole said, "That's Seal." Nora went still. He was here himself. He left 3 minutes before you walked in, Mrs. Aldridge said. He did not seem pleased. He had been here, in this office, trying to determine whether the assessment had completed before he filed. He had come himself, which meant he understood how much depended on the timing, and he had left 3 minutes before they arrived. He was somewhere in this town right now. She put the assessment copies into the oilcloth satchel. The courthouse, she said to Cole. He'll go to the courthouse to file. It's the only move he has left. Cole was already at the door. She was beside him. Miss Voss, Mrs. Aldridge said. She turned. Mrs. Aldridge looked at her with those 19 years of careful record-keeping behind her eyes. Get there first, she said. The Harlan Creek Courthouse was 4 blocks from the land office. 4 blocks at a controlled pace that cost Nora something real in terms of restraint, because every part of her wanted to run, and she knew she couldn't. They passed the feed store, the post office, a woman hanging laundry, who called something to a neighbor. Ordinary morning life moving around the outside of the thing happening at its center. Cole matched her pace without being asked. She was aware of him beside her, not behind, not ahead, exactly beside the entire 4 blocks. They turned the corner to the courthouse. Martin Seal was on the steps. He had a leather document case in his left hand and was in conversation with a man in a dark coat who had the bearing of someone professionally accustomed to courthouse steps. Hargrove, she assumed. Denver counsel. Arrived sooner than she'd modeled. Seal saw them at the same moment they saw him. For 1 second, everyone was still. Then Nora walked forward. She did not hesitate. She did not slow down. She walked up the courthouse steps at the same steady pace she had been maintaining for 4 blocks, and she reached the clerk's window inside before Seal had finished turning to follow, and she placed the certified assessment copy on the counter and said, I need to file a formal submission of updated property assessment for Larimer Ranch Creekwood Road. The assessment was completed this morning, and I have the certified county land office copy. She opened the satchel and added the dispute notation receipt, the affidavit reference, and the fraud inquiry filing number from Brandt's office. I also need to formally notify the court of an active criminal inquiry into documents associated with secondary promissory notes on this property. The clerk, a young man who had clearly not anticipated this being the nature of his morning, looked at the stack of documents, looked at Nora, looked at Cole behind her, looked past them at Seal and Hargrove, who had now entered the courthouse lobby. I'll need to, he started. All of those documents are certified originals or certified copies with county stamps, Nora said. The assessment was completed and stamped this morning at 6:47. The criminal inquiry reference number was assigned by Sheriff Brandt's office 4 days ago. Everything you need to process this submission is in that stack. I'll wait. The clerk looked at the documents again. Then he began to process them. Seal stepped forward. I have a petition to file, he said. His voice was controlled. The voice of a man who had operated in legal spaces for a long time and understood how to be calm inside them. You're welcome to file, Nora said without turning around. The submission ahead of you will be on record first. That assessment is disputed, Seal said. She turned then, looked at him directly for the first time at close range. He was, as she had assessed from across the street, composed, carefully presented, and possessed of the specific confidence of a man who had never been successfully challenged on his home ground. "The assessment is a certified county document completed by the Harlan Creek Land Office," she said. "If you wish to dispute it, the process for doing that is a formal challenge filed with the county assessor's office. The challenge process takes 30 days minimum." She held his gaze. "In 30 days, the criminal fraud inquiry currently active with Sheriff Brandt's office will have advanced considerably. I would think carefully about the timing of any additional filings." He looked at her, and she saw it, not rage, not panic, but the specific cold recalibration of a man who had just understood that the person across from him had been several steps ahead of him for longer than he had realized. "Who are you?" he said. Quiet, genuine. "Nora Voss," she said. "Account manager for the Larimer Ranch operation." He looked at Cole. Cole said nothing. He simply looked back at Seal with those gray eyes and the absolute stillness of a man who had decided he did not need to say a word. "The secondary note," Seal started, "is subject to an active dispute notation filed with the county land office," Nora said, "and contains a signature on the modification addendum that the territorial handwriting examiner is currently reviewing at Sheriff Brandt's request." She paused. "I would be very careful, Mr. Seal, about what you file in the next 30 days. Hargrove put his hand on Seal's arm. Lawyer's instinct. He had heard the words criminal inquiry and territorial examiner and was doing exactly what a good lawyer did, which was stopping his client from saying anything else. Seal looked at Nora for a moment longer, then at Cole, then at the clerk who had finished processing and was stamping the submission with the particular authoritative sound of institutional machinery doing what it was designed to do. Seal did not file his petition. He turned, said something quietly to Hargrove, and walked out of the courthouse. Not fast, not slow. The walk of a man who was not running and was determined that no one would be able to say he had run. But he walked out. The clerk slid the submission receipt across the counter. "All filed and recorded," he said. "Ma'am." She picked it up. She looked at it, the stamp, the date, the time. 8:23 in the morning. Everything on record. Everything in order. She turned to Cole. He was looking at her with that expression she had stopped trying to name weeks ago. He said nothing. But he put his hand out, not to shake, just open just there, and she looked at it for a moment, and then put her hand in his, and felt the steadiness of it, that particular groundedness she had been noticing since the first week. They stood like that for 3 seconds in the Harlan Creek courthouse lobby, while the clerk shuffled papers, and somewhere outside a wagon went past, and then she said, "We should go tell Brandt." "We should," he said. His hand stayed where it was for one more second. Then he let go. They walked out into the morning. Brandt was in his office. He listened to the full account without interrupting, which by now she expected from him. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair and said, "He left without filing." "Without filing," she confirmed. "The petition is dead," he said. "Without the petition, the clause can't be invoked. Without the clause, he has no legal mechanism to touch that property." "Correct," she said. "And with the fraud inquiry active, he can't initiate any new legal proceedings related to properties under investigation without exposing himself to additional scrutiny," she said. "Hargrove knows that. That's why he stopped him from talking." Brandt was quiet for a moment. "The other families," he said. "I delivered 2 packages last night, Calloway and the Vance property. Both families understood the situation. Both filed this morning before I came back here." He paused. "I'm going to the remaining 2 today." "Good," she said. "When the territorial examiner comes back on the handwriting comparison," Brandt said, "we'll have the foundation for a full criminal case, not just the Larimer note, all of it. The corridor scheme, the Hadley property, everything." She nodded. "It'll take time." "It will," he said, "but it'll hold." He looked at her and then at Cole. "You 2 did good work." Cole said, "She did good work." Brandt looked at Nora. "He ain't wrong," he said. She did not answer that. There was a warmth moving through her that she was not going to describe in the sheriff's office, so she picked up her satchel and said, "Let us know when you hear from the territorial examiner." "You'll be the first," he said. They walked out into Harlan Creek's mid-morning. The town was fully awake now. People on the boardwalk, the sound of commerce from the feed store, a child running somewhere she couldn't see. The ordinary texture of a day that did not know what had been decided inside the courthouse 40 minutes ago. Cole stopped on the boardwalk. "You hungry?" he said. She realized she was. She hadn't eaten. She had ridden hard and walked fast and stood in a courthouse lobby and done the most important work of her life before 8:30 in the morning, and she had not eaten. "Yes," she said. "Petra's opens at 8, he said. "She'll still have the good coffee." They walked to Petra's. They sat at the same table as before 2 nights ago, and Petra brought coffee without being asked and looked at both of them with the particular satisfied expression of a woman who understood more about what was happening than anyone had told her. "Same as last time," Petra said. "Please," Nora said. Petra went. Cole wrapped both hands around his coffee cup and looked at the table for a moment. Then he said, "I keep thinking about what you said, about the Hadley family, about not wanting anyone else to have that morning." "Yes," she said. "4 families," he said. "You may have just made sure 4 families don't have that morning." She looked at her coffee. "We," she said. He was quiet. "You found Eleanor's garden," she said. "You kept it alive for 4 years because it deserved to be tended. You let me read your ledger before I'd agreed to anything. You didn't argue when I said we needed to ride instead of take the wagon. You stood beside me in that lobby, and you didn't say a single word when Seal was standing right there, even though I know what that cost you." She looked at him. "That is not nothing, Cole. That is not something that any other man I've known would have done." He held her gaze. "You're giving me too much credit." "I'm giving you exactly the correct amount," she said. "I work with numbers. I don't miscalculate." He looked at her for a long time. Then he said, "What do you need?" "Right now, today. Not the filing, not the case, not Brandt. What do you need?" She thought about it, genuinely thought about it, which was something she had stopped doing for herself a long time ago. "I need to go home," she said. She heard herself say it. The word home applied to Larimer Ranch. She had not applied that word to any place in 4 years. Cole heard it too. She could see it register in his face, not with triumph, not with the particular satisfaction of a man who had gotten what he wanted. Something quieter, more careful. The expression of a man who understood that a word like that from a woman like her meant something real and did not intend to make less of it by reacting too much. "Then let's go home," he said. Petra brought the food. They ate. Outside, the town continued its ordinary morning, and inside that small restaurant, in the particular warmth of a space that was neither ranch nor courthouse nor government office, just 2 people eating breakfast after a hard morning. Something settled into place that had been moving for weeks, not with ceremony, not with declaration. Just the quiet fact of it, solid as ground underfoot, the way the most real things always were. She reached for her coffee. His hand was near hers on the table, not touching, just near. She did not move hers away. Neither did he. And somewhere across town, Martin Seal was sitting in a room with his Denver lawyer looking at a case that had collapsed under documentation he had never seen coming, built by a woman he had never planned for, and whatever he was feeling in that room, she had stopped thinking about him entirely. The work was done. The ranch was safe. The other families were protected. And the man sitting across from her with his careful gray eyes and his steady hands and his 4 years kept garden was looking at her with the particular expression of someone who had stopped expecting things to be other than they were and was now sitting quietly inside the surprise of them being considerably better. Outside, the morning continued. She realized, no longer thinking about leaving. She was thinking about spring and what the garden would look like when it came. The ride back to the ranch was the quietest ride they had taken together, and it was a different kind of quiet from all the ones before it. Not the focused silence of 2 people running toward a deadline. Not the careful distance of the first weeks when they were still learning where the edges of each other were. This was the quiet of two people who had just come through something real together and were still feeling the shape of it, the way you feel the ground under your feet differently after you've nearly lost it. Nora rode with the oilcloth satchel across her lap and the submission receipt inside it, and did not open her notebook once. Cole rode beside her and did not speak, but twice she caught him looking at her with that expression she had run out of careful names for, and she did not look away. The ranch came into view. She had looked at it on her first morning with the appraising eye of someone cataloging a temporary situation. She looked at it now and felt something she did not immediately try to name, because she had learned in the past several weeks that the things worth feeling were often the ones that resisted quick classification. "Home," she said quietly to herself. Cole heard it. She knew he heard it. He said nothing, and the nothing was exactly right. They tied the horses. She went inside first and set the satchel on the table and stood in the kitchen for a moment, just standing, not moving, not calculating, not planning the next document or the next filing or the next step. Just standing in a room that had, without her entirely noticing it happening, become the room she thought of when she thought of where she was. Amos and Dale were in the barn. She could hear their voices, easy, unhurried, the particular rhythm of young men doing work they knew well. The kitchen was warm from the banked stove. Someone had left the coffee pot ready. She put the kettle on and sat down and looked at her hands. Her right hand had stopped shaking. She noticed that. Cole came in. He saw her at the table, and he saw her hands, and he poured 2 cups from the pot she'd just put on, and set one in front of her, and sat down across from her, and they sat in the kitchen of the Larimer Ranch in the middle of the morning, with the work behind them, and the future not yet spoken, and for a long moment neither of them said anything at all. Then Cole said, "I want to ask you something." "All right," she said. "Before I do," he said, "I want to say something first, and I need you to let me finish it." She looked at him. He had both hands around his cup, and he was looking at the table, which was unusual. He was a man who looked at things directly. The fact that he wasn't looking at her told her this cost him something. When Eleanor died, he said, "I thought that was the end of a certain kind of life. Not dramatic about it. Just I knew what I'd had and I knew it was gone, and I decided I was all right with what remained, which was the land and the work and getting through days." He paused. "I placed that advertisement because I needed help with the accounts. That was the full extent of what I was thinking." She waited. "You came in and read my ledger before you agreed to anything," he said. "You reorganized my kitchen, and you didn't tell me why, and you were right about why. You found a fraud that would have taken this place from me inside of 2 weeks, and you didn't tell me about it until you'd already built half the solution." He looked up then. "You know what I kept thinking those first days?" "What?" she said. "I kept thinking this woman has been doing this her whole life," he said. "Carrying other people's weight and getting none of the credit for it. I kept thinking about that, and it made me—" He stopped. "It made me angry on your behalf in a way I didn't have the right to be yet." She felt that land in a very specific place. She did not trust herself to speak. "I'm not a man who says things he doesn't mean," he said. "So I'm going to say this once plain. I don't want you here because of the arrangement. I don't want you here because of the accounts or the ledger, or because you saved this ranch, though you did. And I will never be able to thank you adequately for that." He looked at her. "I want you here because this house is different with you in it. Because I sleep better. Because I started coming in from the pasture looking forward to something, and it took me an embarrassingly long time to understand that the something was you." He paused. "I'm asking you to stay, not as an arrangement, not for the work. Just stay." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside she could hear Amos saying something to Dale that made Dale laugh. A young man's laugh uncomplicated the sound of someone with nothing pressing on them. The kettle had begun to murmur. Ordinary sounds of an ordinary morning. She looked at Cole Larimer across the table, where they had worked through documents and debt ratios and fraud schemes, and the occasional supper, and she thought about $17.40 and a torn advertisement, and a woman who had signed her name without reading the last line, because she had stopped believing the last line mattered. "I need to tell you something too," she said, "and then I'll answer your question." He waited. "I didn't read the last line of the arrangement when I signed it," she said. "Not because I was careless, because I had stopped believing that anything I agreed to would turn out to mean what it said." She looked at her hands. "I came here expecting I don't know what I expected. Nothing that involved feeling anything. Nothing that involved wanting to stay." She paused. "The first night I was here, I lay in that east-facing room and I made a list in my head of the things I needed to accomplish before I could justify moving on. It was a practical list. It had nothing to do with you." "I know," he said. "The list stopped being relevant somewhere in the second week," she said. "I noticed that, and I didn't do anything about it because I had gotten very good at not doing anything about things I noticed in myself." She looked at him. "I stopped making exit plans, Cole. I stopped thinking about what comes next somewhere after next. I started thinking about spring, about the garden, about whether the south pasture drainage would hold through the wet season, and whether the ranch hands would need new gear before winter." She paused. "I started thinking like someone who intended to be here." He was very still. "I didn't plan that," she said. "I want you to know that. It wasn't a decision I made. It was just what happened. And I've been a woman who planned everything for so long that I don't entirely know what to do with something that happened on its own." She met his eyes. "But I know what it is. And I know what my answer is." "Tell me," he said. "Yes," she said. "I'll stay." He looked at her for a long moment. And then Cole Larimer, who almost never smiled, smiled. Not the barely there quarter inch she had been cataloging for weeks. A real one, full, unhurried, entirely unguarded, the smile of a man who had stopped expecting something and received it anyway. She felt it go through her like the first warm day after a long winter. She did not look away from it. "Good," he said. The same word as before in the restaurant, but it meant something larger now. It meant everything. 3 weeks later, the letter arrived from the Territorial Examiner's office. Brant brought it himself, which told her its contents before she opened it. He rode in on a Tuesday afternoon and came to the kitchen door and said, "It's confirmed," and set the envelope on the table. She opened it, read it, set it down. The Territorial Examiner had confirmed with full professional documentation that the signature on the modification notice was not Cole Larimer's. The letter outlined the specific points of divergence, 7 of them, including the L in Larimer, that Cole had identified on the first day, and concluded unambiguously that the document had been signed by a different hand and presented fraudulently. "This is the criminal case," she said. "The Territorial Marshal's office is already involved," Brant said. "I sent them the corridor map and the Denver ownership filing last week. They've been building the case from their end." He paused. "Seal is not going to be a problem much longer." She looked at the letter. "The Hadley family," she said. "Is there any way to—" "The Territorial Marshal is looking at restitution as part of the case," Brant said. "I mentioned the Hadley situation specifically. Can't promise anything, but it's in front of people who can do something about it." She nodded. It wasn't everything, but it was something. It was considerably more than nothing, which was what had existed before. "The other 3 families," she asked. "All filed, all protected. The Vance wife." Brant paused and almost smiled. "Came to my office yesterday to ask if she could help with anything else. I told her I'd let her know." Cole, who had been leaning in the doorway, said, "You brought the letter yourself." "Figured it deserved a personal delivery," Brant said. He looked at Nora. "You know what I said in my office the day you walked in with the corridor map? About most lawyers not being able to do that in a week." "I remember," she said. "I've been doing this job for 30 years, he said. "I have never seen anyone walk into a situation that complex and build a case that clean that fast." He held her gaze. "What you did for this county, for those 4 families, for every family Seal hadn't gotten to yet, I want you to understand that. She did not look away from it because she had spent 11 years of her adult life being invisible in her own work, and she had decided she was not going to do that anymore. "Thank you, Sheriff," she said. He put his hat on. "I'll let you know when the marshal's office makes a move." He looked at Cole on his way out. "You got a good one, Larimer?" Cole looked at Nora. "I know," he said. Brant rode out. The kitchen was quiet. Cole picked up the examiner's letter and read it through. Set it down. "It's over," he said. "This part is over," she said. "The criminal case will take time." "But the ranch is safe." "The ranch is safe," she said. "The assessment is on record. The clause can't trigger. The fraud inquiry protects you from any new proceedings while the case builds. You could not lose this land legally, even if Seal tried." She paused. "He won't try. Hargrove will have told him that." Cole was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Come here." She looked at him. He was standing near the window, not the table, and he said it simply, not a demand, not a question, just a statement of what he wanted. "Come here." She crossed the kitchen. He put his hand against the side of her face carefully, the way he did everything with that particular steadiness that had been the most restful thing she had encountered in years, and looked at her for a moment before he said, "Thank you, Cole." "Let me say it," he said. "You saved this place. You saved 4 families. You rode hard and argued down lawyers and sat in Brant's office for 3 hours writing by hand until your fingers shook, and you didn't stop, and you didn't complain, and you didn't leave." His thumb moved slightly against her cheek. "Thank you." She looked at him. At the careful gray eyes and the steadiness and the man who had kept a garden alive because some things deserve to be tended. She put her hand over his where it rested against her face. "You're welcome," she said. He kissed her. Not dramatically, not as a conclusion to something, not as a reward or a release of tension or any of the other things kisses in hard situations sometimes were. Just as a fact. As the natural completion of everything that had been moving in this direction for weeks without either of them naming it, the way a river completes itself when it reaches the place it has always been going. She kissed him back. Outside, the late afternoon had gone gold and quiet, and the ranch went on about its business the way it always had, indifferent to the particular history being made inside its kitchen and in the barn. Amos said something to Dale that made Dale laugh again, and somewhere in the distance, a horse moved through the south pasture with the unhurried ease of an animal that knew its ground. When they stopped, she stayed where she was for a moment, his hand still against her face, hers still over his. "The south pasture drainage?" she said. He looked at her. "What about it?" "I've been thinking about it," she said. "There's a grading problem on the east side that's going to matter when the spring wet comes. I want to look at it this week." He was quiet for a moment, and then he made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was in the same family, warm, surprised, completely genuine. "All right," he said. "We'll look at it this week." She stepped back, picked up her notebook from the table, opened it. He watched her. "Right now. The drainage problem doesn't resolve itself because we're not thinking about it," she said. He shook his head, which she had learned meant he found something both exasperating and deeply right, and went to put more wood on the stove. Winter came in earnest 6 weeks after that. It came the way things came to this part of the country, with full intention settling over the land like a decision made and acted upon without apology. The temperatures dropped. The pastures went hard. The days shortened until the light in the east-facing bedroom was brief and cold, and more beautiful for being brief. The ranch changed with the season the way it always had, but the house changed differently. Not in the structural ways. The walls were the same walls, the kitchen table, the same table, the shelf of ledger books, the same shelf. But the texture of the place had shifted in ways that were felt rather than seen. The dry goods shelf was reorganized. The financial records were current for the first time in years, cross-referenced against agricultural forecasts and seasonal projections that now extended 2 years out. The livestock valuation was updated monthly. Every document associated with the property was filed in a system of Nora's design that could be produced complete and in order within 5 minutes of any request. The house knew it was not temporary anymore, and so did the people in it. One evening in late November, Nora was at the kitchen table with the winter accounts, while Cole sat across from her, reading a letter from the Territorial Marshal's office. A routine update confirming that the investigation into Seal Holdings was proceeding, and that Seal's ability to file any proceedings related to county properties was formally suspended pending resolution. She was making a notation when Cole said, "There's something in here about the Hadley family." She looked up. "The Marshal's office has located them," he said. "They're in New Mexico. The restitution assessment is being calculated. They may be able to recover something from the sale value of their property." He paused. "Not everything, but something." She set down her pencil. "That's good," she said. "It's because of you," he said. "The corridor documentation you built, that's what gave the Marshal's office the framework to calculate what was taken." She thought about the Hadley family in New Mexico, people she had never met in a place she had never been living the life they had been forced into. She thought about the morning she had imagined, the morning she had not wanted anyone to have, the morning of waking up and deciding the fight was over. They hadn't gotten their land back, but they would get something. And every family who had still been holding on their land in the corridor was still holding it because of documentation filed at the right offices, in the right order, at the right time. She picked up her pencil and returned to the accounts. Cole returned to the letter. The stove ticked with the particular sound of cast iron holding heat, and outside the winter moved across the land with its full weight, and inside the kitchen of the Larimer Ranch 2 people worked in the best silence she had ever inhabited. After a while, Cole said without looking up, "Dale asked me today if you were staying permanent." She kept her eyes on the ledger. "What did you tell him?" "I told him to ask you himself," he said. She looked up. He was looking at her now with that expression she had stopped trying to name, because she knew what it was, had known for weeks, had simply been allowing herself to know it more fully with each day that passed. It was the expression of a man who had stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop and had begun carefully to believe in the floor. "Next time he asks," she said, "tell him yes." Cole held her gaze for a moment. Then he went back to the letter, and she went back to the ledger, and neither of them said anything else about it, because nothing else needed to be said. Spring came the way she had imagined it. The garden on the north side of the house came back with the particular stubborn vitality of things that had been tended through difficult seasons, not despite the hard winters, but in some way she couldn't explain botanically, but understood in her bones because of them. The structure was Eleanor's. The tending had been Cole's for 4 years. The new section, a row along the eastern rail, that had been Nora's idea, and Cole's labor, planted together on a Saturday in April, when the ground was first soft enough, was both of theirs. She stood at the rail on a morning in late April and looked at it. Cole came to stand beside her. "The east row is taking," she said. "It is," he said. "Eleanor's design was good," she said. "The spacing makes sense for this soil." "She knew what she was doing," he said. "So do you." She looked at the garden for a moment, at the part that had been there before her, and the part she had helped build, growing alongside each other with no visible line between them. "We should extend it north next year," she said. "There's room, and the light is right." He was quiet for a moment. "That's a next-year plan," he said. "Yes," she said. "Made by someone who intends to be here next year." "Made by someone who intends to be here considerably longer than that," she said. He turned to look at her. She met his gaze and did not qualify the statement, because she had spent enough of her life qualifying things she meant completely, and she was done with that. He put his arm around her simply naturally, the way he did everything without performance or preamble, and she leaned into it, and they stood at the rail of Eleanor's garden on an April morning, and looked at the land that was theirs, now that they had fought for, and documented, and ridden hard to protect, and were going to go on tending together through every season that came. Amos and Dale went past behind them on their way to the south pasture. She heard them without turning, heard Dale say something low to his brother, heard Amos reply with a single syllable that communicated a complete and satisfied understanding of what he was looking at. She did not move. Cole did not move. The land went on around them, wide and indifferent, and entirely theirs. Later that morning, Brant rode in. She saw him coming up the road from the kitchen window and went to the door because Brant did not make social calls, and if he was riding out personally, it meant something had developed. "The marshal made the arrest this morning," he said before he had fully dismounted. "Martin Seal, Harlan Creek 715. Seal Holdings is being dissolved by court order. All outstanding notes associated with the corridor properties are being reviewed for fraudulent construction." He paused. "Every property in that corridor is free and clear of any seal-related instrument as of today." She stood in the doorway and let that settle. 4 families. The Calloway place. The Vance property. The 2 others Brant had ridden to in the dark. And Larimer Ranch on Creekwood Road, 7 miles past the junction with its east-facing window and its north side garden and its south pasture drainage that still needed attention before the next wet season. All of them safe. All of them clear. "The Hadley restitution," she said. "Still processing," Brant said. "But with Seal's assets under court review, there's more to work with than there was. The marshal's office is optimistic." She nodded. Brant looked at her. "I wanted to tell you in person," he said, "because you built the case that made this possible. You should hear it directly." "Thank you, Sheriff," she said. He put his hat back on. "One more thing," he said. "The Territorial Marshal's office has asked me informally for now whether you'd be willing to consult on similar situations in other counties. There are other Martin Seals out there. There are other families who don't have someone like you walking in their door." He held her gaze. "I told him I'd ask." She looked at him, then at the land behind him. The ranch, the road, the sky above the flats, that was the particular blue of a clear spring morning. "Tell him I'd be willing to discuss it," she said. "From here." Brant smiled. "From here," he said. "I'll pass that along." He rode out. Cole came to stand beside her in the doorway. He had heard most of it. She knew because he had the expression of a man who had heard something that pleased him and was not going to make a fuss about it. "Consulting work," he said. "Potentially," she said. "From here," he said. "From here," she said. He was quiet for a moment. "You know what this means," he said. "What?" "You're going to need a proper office," he said. "That kitchen table is not going to be sufficient for a woman consulting for the Territorial Marshal's office." She looked at him. "The room at the end of the hall east of the kitchen has good light and sufficient space," she said. "I'll build you a proper desk," he said. "Something solid." "Make it large enough for 2 people to work at," she said. He looked at her. That expression. The real one, the full one, the one she had been accumulating evidence of for months, and now simply accepted as the way he looked at her as her permanent and completely sufficient accounting of how things stood between them. "I can do that," he said. She went inside. He followed. The door closed on the April morning on the garden coming in along the north rail on the south pasture, drying out after the spring. Wet on the ranch that had been a contract and had become a life. The kind of life that is made not from what you plan, but from what you stay for, from what you tend through the hard seasons, from what you build alongside someone who notices you with the particular attention that means they see not just what you do, but who you are. Nora Voss had come to Larimer Ranch because she needed a roof. She had signed a practical arrangement without reading the last line. She had told herself it was arithmetic, a wage, a room and exit from the wreckage. She had found instead the one thing she had stopped planning for a life that held her name. Not because someone gave it to her, because she had walked in and done the work and stayed and built it herself, and this time every last word of it was hers.